February 21st, 1994, 9:17 a.m. Aldrich Ames climbs into his Jaguar, adjusts his expensive suit, and starts the engine. He's heading to work, same as every morning. CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. 30 years he's been making this drive. 30 years of service to American intelligence. But Rick, as his colleagues call him, isn't thinking about work right now. He's thinking about the money. $2.7 million to be exact. That's how much Moscow has paid him over the past 9 years. For secrets, for names, for the identities of every American spy operating inside the Soviet Union. 10 of them are dead because of Rick. Maybe more. He's lost count. 2 blocks from his house, unmarked cars slam to a stop in front of him. Behind him, boxing him in. FBI agents swarm the Jaguar with weapons drawn. Within seconds, Rick's face is pressed against the hood, hands cuffed behind his back. Game over. But here's the thing nobody knows yet. The thing that will haunt the intelligence community for decades. Rick Ames wasn't caught by satellites or supercomputers or sophisticated surveillance. He was caught by a woman sitting in a back office who noticed something everyone else missed. A typo. One microscopic writing habit buried in thousands of pages of documents. That's it. One tiny pattern that might as well have been a confession written in blood. And the man responsible for the most catastrophic intelligence breach in American history is about to realize that the smallest details are always the ones that destroy you. January 1991. CIA headquarters, 7th floor. Inside a windowless conference room, 8 counterintelligence officers sit around a table with cold coffee and no answers. For 6 years, American intelligence operations across Eastern Europe have been collapsing like dominoes. Agents recruited at enormous risk are vanishing overnight. Safe houses in Vienna get raided before they're even used. Operations in Prague shut down hours after activation. Classified cable traffic intercepted before it reaches its destination. It's not bad luck. It's not coincidence. Someone inside the CIA is bleeding secrets to Moscow. A mole. And whoever it is knows exactly what they're doing. They understand tradecraft better than the people hunting them. They know what raises red flags. They know how to stay invisible. They know the system inside and out because they built parts of it. The team has run every protocol. Polygraphs, financial audits, travel pattern analysis, phone records, email logs, psychological profiles. They've narrowed suspect lists. They've expanded suspect lists. They've followed leads across 3 continents and found nothing, absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, 3 floors down in an office that smells like stale coffee and flickering fluorescent lights, Sandra Grimes is doing something nobody else has thought to do. She's reading. Not databases, not intercepts, not surveillance reports, just reading. Old memos, operational cables, briefing notes, internal emails, handwritten summaries, thousands of pages of routine CIA paperwork written by dozens of officers over a decade. Boring stuff. Standard intelligence assessments formatted in the agency's dry, bureaucratic style. But Sandra has this weird talent. She notices things. Tiny things. The way people structure sentences, the rhythm of their words, how they use punctuation, whether they write cannot or cannot, whether they favor semicolons or commas, where they place their periods. It's not something she learned in training. Her brain just works that way. She reads a document and she hears a voice, a personality, a fingerprint made of grammar. Over the past few months, buried in mountains of leaked intelligence that ended up in Moscow's hands, she's noticed something strange. A tick. A microscopic writing habit that keeps appearing in compromised reports. The same misplaced comma before however. The same weird extra space after colons. The same slightly awkward phrasing when transitioning between ideas. It's so subtle most people wouldn't catch it even if you pointed it out directly, but Sandra sees it. And once you see a pattern like that, you can't unsee it. So she starts pulling old emails from the agency's servers, briefing notes from past operations, personnel files, handwritten memos scanned into the database, anything written by officers who would have had access to the intelligence that got leaked. She's looking for a match. One person whose writing carries that exact microscopic signature. After weeks of reading, cross-referencing, comparing sentence structures and comma placements, she finds him. Aldrich Ames, Rick, 30-year veteran of the CIA's Soviet division, respected enough, trusted enough, unremarkable enough. The kind of guy who fades into the wallpaper at office parties. Never the smartest person in the room, but competent, dependable, forgettable. And his writing matches perfectly. The same comma quirks, the same spacing habits, the same sentence rhythm. It's not proof, not yet, but it's the first real lead the CIA has had in 6 years. Sandra takes her findings to her supervisor. Within days, a quiet investigation begins, and what they discover is absolutely staggering. Nobody suspected Rick Ames because Rick Ames was invisible. That was his superpower. He wasn't brilliant, he wasn't charming. He wasn't climbing the career ladder. He was just there. A middle-aged analyst with a mediocre performance record and a known drinking problem. The kind of guy who shows up, does his job, collects his paycheck, goes home. Unremarkable, forgettable, safe. But here's what nobody knew. Rick Ames was also the most damaging traitor in American intelligence history, and he'd been selling secrets to Moscow for nearly a decade. It started in April 1985. Rick was broke. His first marriage was falling apart. Legal fees piling up, creditors calling. He was bitter, desperate, drowning in debt. And he had access to some of the CIA's most sensitive intelligence on Soviet operations. So one afternoon, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. and made an offer. Not small secrets. Everything. The names of every CIA asset operating inside Russia. The details of every ongoing operation. The identities of officers working undercover in Moscow, everything. In exchange, the Soviets handed him $50,000, cash in a bag. No questions asked. And Rick realized he'd just found the solution to all his problems. Over the next 9 years, Rick gave Moscow intelligence so valuable it reshaped the Cold War. He handed them the names of at least 10 Soviet citizens secretly working for the United States. Within months, all 10 were arrested. Some imprisoned, some executed. Valery Martinov shot in the back of the head in a Moscow basement. Sergei Motorin executed after a show trial designed to humiliate him. Dmitry Polyakov, one of the CIA's most valuable sources for decades, betrayed and killed. And those are just the ones we know about. Intelligence analysts estimate Rick's betrayal led to the deaths of dozens of people, possibly more. The exact number remains classified. Meanwhile, the CIA was hemorrhaging operations. Missions that took years to plan collapsed overnight. Informants vanished. Safe houses got raided hours after activation, and nobody could figure out why. The agency launched internal investigations. They ran polygraphs. They analyzed communication patterns. They suspected everyone and found nothing. Because Rick understood the system, he knew what triggered alarms. He knew how to avoid suspicion. He was careful, methodical, invisible. Except for one thing. He wasn't careful about the money. In 1989, Rick bought a house in Arlington, Virginia, not a modest townhouse, a $500,000 mansion, paid in cash. He drove a Jaguar, wore custom Italian suits, took luxury vacations to Rome, Paris, Switzerland, drank $1,000 bottles of wine at restaurants his colleagues couldn't afford. And somehow, nobody at the CIA thought this was suspicious. A mid-level analyst making $60,000 a year suddenly living like a tech CEO? Nobody asked questions. Nobody ran a financial audit. Nobody checked his bank records. The agency's internal security was so incompetent, Rick could have bought a yacht and parked it on the Potomac and nobody would have blinked. By 1993, Rick had collected over $2.7 million from Moscow. He was one of the highest paid spies in history, and he felt untouchable. But while Rick was buying real estate and drinking expensive wine, Sandra Grimes was sitting in her cramped office, reading documents, noticing patterns, looking for the microscopic quick crack that would bring everything down. And she found it. Not in financial records, not in surveillance footage, in the way Rick wrote his sentences, the way he used commas, the tiny grammatical fingerprint he left in every document he touched. It wasn't courtroom evidence, but it was enough to point investigators in the right direction. And once they started digging, Rick's entire world began to collapse. Once Sandra's discovery pointed investigators toward Rick, the CIA's counterintelligence team moved carefully. Too carefully, some would later argue. But they couldn't just arrest him. They needed proof, hard evidence that would hold up in federal court. So they watched, and they waited, and they documented everything. Financial investigators subpoenaed Rick's bank records. What they found was absurd. Between 1985 and 1993, over $2 million flowed through his accounts. Deposits that couldn't be explained by his salary. Wire transfers from offshore banks. Cash deposits in round numbers. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, 100,000 there. Surveillance teams started following him everywhere. To work, to the grocery store, to the bank, to restaurants where he ate meals that cost more than most people's car payments. They watched him meet contacts at shopping malls. They watched him use payphones, classic tradecraft to avoid wiretaps, and they noticed a pattern. Every few weeks, Rick would leave work early, drive to a specific location in Northern Virginia, a park, a parking lot, a quiet street, and leave a signal. A chalk mark on a mailbox, a piece of tape on a street sign, a potted plant moved to a specific position on a porch. But they needed more. They needed to catch him red-handed. So in early 1994, investigators got a warrant to search Rick's house while he was at work. What they found was devastating. Classified CIA documents, hundreds of pages, internal memos, operational cables, intelligence reports that should never have left Langley, all sitting in Rick's home office, organized in filing cabinets like he was running his own intelligence agency. Some documents were marked top secret. Others were code word classified, meaning only a handful of people in the entire agency should have had access. Rick had taken them home. Along with the documents, investigators found notes, handwritten summaries of classified operations, lists of CIA assets overseas, names that got people killed, meeting schedules with Russian contacts, and perhaps most damning, a computer diskette containing a letter Rick had written to his handlers in Moscow. The letter was a shopping list, intelligence he was offering to sell, asset names, operational plans, technical capabilities, everything Moscow wanted to know about American operations in Eastern Europe, all typed out in Rick's unmistakable writing style, complete with his signature punctuation quirks. The investigators photographed everything, put it all back exactly as they found it, walked out without Rick ever knowing they'd been there. Now they had him. The classified documents alone were enough for felony charges. The handwritten notes proved intent. The letter to Moscow was direct evidence of espionage, but timing mattered. The CIA needed to arrest Rick without tipping off his Russian handlers. If Moscow realized Rick was caught, they'd shut down operations and disappear. The agency wanted Rick and his contacts, so they planned carefully. And on February 21st, 1994, they made their move. Monday morning, Rick leaves his house at the usual time, climbs into his Jaguar, starts driving toward Langley. He never arrives. 2 blocks from home, FBI agents and unmarked cars block the road. Within seconds, they swarm the Jaguar with weapons drawn. Rick barely reacts before they yank him out, slam him against the hood, cuff his hands behind his back. No dramatic chase, no shootout, no last-minute escape, just a middle-aged man in an expensive suit standing in a suburban street, realizing his 9-year run just ended. At the exact same moment, FBI agents storm Rick's house and arrest his wife, Rosario. She'd been complicit. She knew where the money came from. She helped him communicate with Moscow. She was part of the operation. Rick didn't fight. Within days of his arrest, facing overwhelming evidence and the possibility of execution, he agreed to cooperate. He confessed. The prosecutor made it clear, plead guilty, tell us everything, you get life in prison. Refuse, and we pursue capital punishment for treason. Rick chose life, so he talked. Over weeks, Rick sat in interrogation rooms and laid out the entire operation, every meeting with Russian handlers, every dead drop location, every classified document he'd stolen, every asset he'd betrayed, the names of people who died because of him, the operations that collapsed, the millions Moscow paid him, all of it. He didn't express remorse. He didn't apologize. He just explained in his flat, bureaucratic tone how he did it, why he did it, what he got in exchange. The investigators took notes, recorded every word, tried not to show their disgust. Rick's betrayal was catastrophic. He'd compromised over 100 intelligence operations. He'd exposed more than 20 CIA assets, at least 10 executed. He'd handed Moscow detailed information about American intelligence capabilities, surveillance methods, operational strategies that took decades to develop. The damage was incalculable. incalculable. Some officers said Rick set American intelligence back 20 years. Others said worse. Moscow had known everything, every operation, every asset, every vulnerability. For nearly a decade, the CIA operated blind, feeding intelligence to an enemy who already knew every move. And Rick enabled all of it. For money. Just money. He wanted a bigger house, a nicer car, a more comfortable life, and he traded human lives for it. April 28, 1994. Rick Ames stands in federal court and pleads guilty to espionage and tax evasion. The judge sentences him to life in prison without possibility of parole. His wife Rosario receives 5 years for conspiracy and tax evasion, released in 1999. Rick is still in prison, currently incarcerated at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, high-security federal facility where he'll spend the rest of his life. He's 82 years old now. He'll never leave. He'll die there, alone, forgotten by everyone except the families of the people he murdered.